Shooting the Shiznit is exclusively sponsored this month by Cloud9 LLC Vapor Company. Cloud9 LLC Vapor Company is your go-to vape shop in Oxford, Mississippi. Located on the West Oxford Loop near Continental Hair Salon. That's right, you can reach them on Facebook at /Cloud9 Vapor Supplies. That's /Cloud9 Vapor Supplies. Or over there on Twitter at Cloud9 Vapor Ox OX. That's Cloud9 Vapor Ox OX. Or you can call them at 662-832-6297. Over 300 flavors of juice, and if you need a starter kit, they're the place to go in Oxford, Mississippi. Come in and test all the flavors and tell them that Shooting the Shiznit sent you. Stop right there. All you got to do is go right into the store. That is into the Cloud9 LLC Vape Company. Go in there and say, I heard about you on Shooting the Shiznit, and you'll get a 10% discount. 10% discount. Do it now. Have you listened to last week's episode, the week before, or all the episodes? By the way, all of them are at www.stspod.club and all of the fine podcast players. Now on with the show. Hey, we're live from STS Studios, and I want to welcome today, coming from the green room, Brennon Martin. Brennon, I'm excited about having you. This has been kind of like a long road to bring you on. He's been in the green room waiting around. We had some technical difficulties. We've had me no-showing him one time, but he's been drinking some craft beer over there, and I'm bringing him on. Brennon, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic. That beer was just hit the spot.
Good deal. What I want to start out with is so that we people that don't know who you are, I want to start with your family tree. That's the best way to start. And tell us, now, who was your grandmother?
My grandmother was Christine Teeny Jarrett. Teeny was her nickname. Most of the boys called her Miss Christine. You may have heard my cousin Jeff Jarrett mention her. He talks about being third generation in the business. Teeny was the first. And then his father, my uncle Jerry Jarrett, was the second, and now Jeff is the third.
And so you're the first cousin of Jeff Jarrett, and your mother Carolyn was. Oh man, it's just an excellent story. Just go ahead and tell that part real quick.
Well, so Teeny had two kids. Jerry was her oldest, and then my mother Carolyn was her daughter. And so Carolyn was never in the wrestling business, and I wasn't either. But I got to the point where I thought more and more people needed to know Teeny's story. Teeny was what all the family and all her best friends called her. And I can tell you how that came about if you want. But in any case, I thought more people needed to know Teeny's story. So I decided it was time for me to tell it. So I wrote what I call a biographical novel. And so it's not a straight biography. I wrote it so that it reads like a fiction, but it's based on true story. And in fact, all the stories, but just a couple in there were completely true. I just added a little drama and created some dialogue around some of the stories that I've been told secondhand.
I love it. That was the first page of the book, and it tells you that's what you did. And so here's my process in reading it. You contacted me, and I probably read the first two chapters, okay? And it was about Coco Ware, the Fabulous One's a fantastic story in there. And then I kept saying, well, we're going to do it this, we're going to do it. I was so busy and blah, blah, blah. I wasn't been able to read it. And then I showed you last week, and I told you for sure, no matter what, we'd sit down today. That would be Tuesday show coming up. And so Saturday night, late, I sat down with chapter number 3. And I said, well, I'm going to read, I'm going to read 50 pages. I'm going to go to bed. Well, at 1:15, I quit. It was one of those books where since I have been around wrestling forever, I know the legend of this lady to a certain extent. It just kept on, and guys, this is just not a wrestling book. That's the thing that I really. It's a story. It's a story of two. I think the part of the story which you talk about your mother's Carolyn is the family it's divided in the sense that Jerry seems to be treated a lot different than your mom was, and it just. And it's kind of weird because she didn't seem to treat people differently. Like, it just a total different side of what she did business-wise. She was maybe a way far ahead in her time when it came to the way to treat people and what to do. And something that I want to make a point with her, I always knew her as Miss Christine. Now, because most of the guys I hung out with called her that. We knew she was in charge, and when we went to the matches and she was up in front, then in our minds she was in charge of that town. Now, not knowing the whole inner workings of what town she was in charge of at the time, we did know she was there at Nashville, so we always assumed she was in charge there. She always was so friendly to all of us, and there were groups of guys that would go and hit the circuit, the whole Nashville, Memphis, the whole thing that they would do. But you make a statement. This lady booked and ran over 600 shows. And that was just there's no other woman in the business. There's maybe one other. There was two other women that came to mind when I started doing this. Ann Gunkel, who was not successful, who took over after her husband died. And
right.
And Motoko Baba, who actually died, we lost this year. She was very, very, very important. One of the most important women to wrestle behind Baba, who people didn't understand. She was in charge of a lot of stuff. But your grandmother was she was an inspiration. This is a kind of movie that this could be made into a movie where it's an inspiration for women all over the world.
Well, she was an incredibly strong woman, and that 600 number, I think that probably came from at one point in her career, because if you think about it, so she started running shows in the 60s, and then in 1970, when Nick Goulas and Roy Welch reopened Louisville, she owned Louisville from the beginning, and so she ran Louisville on Tuesday nights, Evansville on Wednesday nights, and on Thursday she ran either Lexington, Kentucky once a month, or one of the spot shows if Lexington wasn't running. And then on Saturdays she ran Nashville, and she did that for 20 years. And so I think that in total goes up to a lot more than 600 shows. But she was on the road 52 weeks a year for 20 years. And so she really was by far the most successful female promoter in the business. But she was just an incredibly strong woman at her time. I mean, she was a single mom, took a second job selling tickets in 1946. Before it was all said and done, she and her son Jerry co-owned the Tennessee and Kentucky territory. So she was a maverick. And you talk about the differences in how she treated my mother versus how she treated Jerry. She was a real person. I mean, I wanted to tell her story, but I wanted to tell it all. And there's no such thing as a perfect person. And so I exposed some of Teeny's warts in this story, and she was not a perfect mother. I can tell you this, she was a perfect grandmother. But, the issues between her and my mother that are talked about a little bit in the book, my mother long ago came to terms with, and she knows that although Jerry may have got special treatment and he may have been her favorite, Teeny still loved my mother very much, and she did the best she could.
I mean, it's just like I said. I could see a movie of it, and one of those things is like, it's guys. We're gonna give you all the details to order you a copy. Also, just to let everyone know, Brennan, you're going to be at All In. I will be at All In also. So I'm just going to be walking around being a mark for the whole weekend. Brennan's going to it's going to be there. Walk up, buy a copy of this book. It's 200 and a little bit over 200 pages. Man, it's just, to me, it's a heck of a story. Reads more like a movie, like you said, than it does an autobiography. One of the stories that I love the most, and I've heard the stories like crazy of the Fabs, is she catches them with ring rats in the van. Was that something that she told to many people, or was that just one of those stories that you had heard?
Well, she may have told some, but that's not a story. I mean, she didn't bring wrestling home to her grandkids. Now, one of the things my mother always didn't like was the family would gather at Teeny's house on Christmas Eve, right, and she and Jerry would talk about wrestling the whole time. And my mother hated wrestling because it took her mother away. As far as she was concerned as a little girl, for Jerry it was this romantic environment that he got to run around in, and he really loved it. For her, my mother, she was never a mark. Right? She smartened herself up when she was about 5 years old, and she never once got fooled by any of it. And it was just this thing that her mother just fell in love with. And Teeny was a real workaholic. I was about to say alcoholic, but Teeny didn't drink at all. But no, she was a real workaholic. And so anyway, she didn't really tell those kinds of stories around me. I first heard that story from Jim Cornette, and I spent a day with him when I was doing the research for the book, and he's the first one that told me that story. But that's one that's been around. A lot of people have heard that one before, but I just thought that it painted the picture of who Teeny was in terms of how she would run the matches and how much she loved the fans, how she treated the wrestlers, and how she dealt with them when there were problems. And I got the chance to talk to Stan Lane. I told him who I was, and as soon as I told him I was Christine Jarrett's grandson, the first thing he said was, "Boy, we gave her hell." So he did not have a bit of remorse over the shenanigans that he got into, but he certainly that didn't keep him from respecting her and what she did. I think everybody respected her. They didn't all like her. I ran into some wrestlers that they didn't like her rules because she wanted to run things a certain way, and not everybody wanted to stay away from the arena rats, and not everybody wanted to be on time and not use foul language and things like that. And they didn't think that this woman should be bossing them around. That didn't stop her from doing it, though.
Yeah, I mean, I never really heard any. And the guys I was around and no one that I remember said anything like "I can't stand her" or stuff like that. There was a respect factor there, and and it was, I mean, it really was strange because, I mean, all the people that I knew in the wrestling business, everyone that ran a show was a man. But we knew that she was behind these shows. There's a really funny story, which part of the story is Pat Malone and Roy Welch actually started that territory where you tell a story where they were doing the carnival thing, where they was doing the tough guy challenges, and the tough guys were kind of like getting tougher. And was it Roy or Pat that decided, hey, some of these matches they have to be worked. So because they had seen two guys at a bar together after one of the matches.
Yeah, now I got to be honest. That's one of the stories that I made up. Right? There's no factual truth in that one, but it came from history that Eddie Marlin told me about how Roy and Pat Malone is the same thing. They used to work the old carnivals, and they, the sideshow matches where they would, let people from the crowd challenge the champion, and they were shoots, right? Where the guys
they were shoots, yeah.
The old country boys would come in but Roy was a brawler. He knew how to put those submission holds on, and he could lick any of those country boys that would come wrestle. But from what Eddie Marlin told me, they got tired of that because it was work. Some of those guys were pretty big, and it was tough to be shooting all day every day. And so they then decided to start running shows on their own where they could control the outcome a little bit. And I needed a way to introduce Nick Goulas into the story. Now, the truth of that, there's several pieces of truth in that chapter. One is that Roy and Pat, they did come out of the circus. They had that in their background. And Pat was the Green Shadow, and he was known for cutting people till he was 70 years old. And the other part of that was that Roy did, in fact, train a bear to wrestle way back in the day. And Scott Teal's got a book that talks about the history of wrestling in Nashville. And there's actually a photo in there of Roy training his bear. And the other part about it was that Pat, at one point, this was many years later, he owned a bear that used to live in his backyard in Nashville. And I got the chance to meet that bear, and I just thought it was the craziest thing that I knew this guy that owned a wrestling bear. And the other part of it that's true is that Roy liked to be in the ring, and he was a booker, and he needed a front man. He needed somebody to be the face of the business, and that's what Nick Goulas ended up being. And so all those elements are true, but the way in which they all come together in my book, that's the one chapter that comes completely out of my imagination.
Hey, I loved it. It's a hell of a story, with and Roy being, and it is the transformation of wrestling. It went from being, and everyone talks about it. Steve Regal had talked about it, and the transformation of this is what we did in carnivals. We got tired of getting our ass whipped, so we decided we were going to make it a work, and that's the thing. Now you were actually listing the towns that they went to. Now I did the old Memphis circuit with the guys, I guess about 6 times. So I know the haul on that. That's a hell of a haul. It's tough to do. But you have a circuit that they were running when Roy and Nick was doing it here, where they was trying to get one of the wrestlers, and this was about a fight. I'm not going to talk about that story. I want someone to read the book, but he was trying to get the guy and listen the towns that he was going to do. I want everyone to take a look at a map and look at this. Monday they were in Memphis. Tuesday they were in Knoxville. Wednesday in Jackson. Thursday in some little town in Arkansas, probably in my little Jonesboro, Arkansas there. Friday in Huntsville, Alabama, and then Saturday in Chattanooga. So, I'm tired just thinking about that, Brennan.
Oh, it's just awful. I mean, that was the problem with that territory, is it was so big. And that's sort of one of the things that contributed to the eventual division of the territory by the NWA, and how Jerry ended up taking over Memphis and the west end of the territory, while Nick Goulas, for a while anyway, until he ran his business into the ground, he got to hang on to the east end, because it was too big a territory for the guys to really work successfully. And so they had to break up the booking. They had to break up, sort of who's doing what circuit. Nick sometimes tried to force people to work both ends, and it ended up, I tell the story of how Corsica Joe sort of got tired of that after a while and took matters into his own hands.
Right. All right. Hold on just a second. We'll take a quick commercial. We'll be right back. Shooting the Shiznit is exclusively sponsored this month by Cloud9 LLC Vapor Company. Cloud9 LLC Vapor Company is your go-to vape shop in Oxford, Mississippi. Located on the West Oxford Loop near Continental Hair Salon. That's right, you can reach them on Facebook at /Cloud9 Vapor Supplies. That's /Cloud9 Vapor Supplies. Or over there on Twitter at Cloud9 Vapor Ox OX. That's Cloud9 Vapor Ox OX. Or you can call them at 662-832-6297. Over 300 flavors of juice, and if you need a starter kit, they're the place to go in Oxford, Mississippi. Come in and test all the flavors and tell them that Shooting the Shiznit sent you. All right, we're back with Brennan. Hey, there's a few things. I just wrote a bunch of stuff here. Just wanted to hear your comment, hear you talk about it. We start with the front cover with Andre the Giant. What made you, it's a hell of a picture. I love it. But what made you choose Andre instead of maybe one of the local guys?
Well, that was actually a cover that ended up not working out too well. And if you buy it today on Amazon, you'll see a completely different cover.
Oh, wow. I got an exclusive here, huh?
You got an exclusive, and I'm going to be taking my last 17 copies of that particular cover with me to StarCast and All In. So the last chance to buy one of those is if you find me in person. You can't buy that one online anymore. The reason I used it was...
Go ahead. Well, what I'm going to do is I want everyone... Hey, this happens, okay?
The reason I picked it was because Andre was an icon, and I thought, I'll use this picture of Andre and Teenie to draw people in. But what I learned was that I spend way too much time explaining to people at events like this that it's not a book about Andre. And so now the cover is it's a stylized photo that we have of just Teenie. It doesn't try to include any of the other boys.
All right. That's I can understand why someone did it. I'm going to actually bring my book with me. I did some pink outlining with it, guys, with a highlighter, but I'm going to have you sign it. And down the line, we're going to give it away here. So it's kind of that'll give you an idea. He's only got 17 of them. There may not even be any when we give it away here on Shoot the Shiznit. But let's see, what else there was a few things you made a reference, and I didn't remember you saying anything else about it except at the front of the book that Teenie was not a fan of Andy Kaufman in that angle.
No, see, she wasn't. And what I always remember her saying was she always talked about it, and I think I used this phrase in the book. She always talked about that mess with Andy Kaufman.
Right. That's what you said.
And she never really told me, because I was a little kid at the time, and she knew that I loved it, and I might have even been at her house when Lawler and Kaufman went on the Letterman show. But I remember watching that and just popping big when Lawler slapped him, and she actually, I still to this day have a photograph. You've probably seen it, the one with Lawler and Rodney Dangerfield when Lawler went to Rodney's bar after the show, and she brought it to me, and Jerry autographed it on the back, to my friend Brennon. But I think the reasons why she didn't like it were a few. One is business where the matches were held in Memphis. She was part owner with Jerry of everything that happened in Kentucky. So, for instance, she never got a penny of profit out of whatever happened in Nashville, even though she ran that town every Saturday night. But the other reason I don't think she liked it had to do with the whole intergender thing. She was not a fan of women wrestlers in general. She had a very small number of women wrestlers that she considered friends. Sarah Lee and Cora Combs. She was friends with them till she died, and she thought the world of them. But in general, she was not a big fan of women wrestlers. So I don't think she liked sort of how it all got started with Kaufman and the intergender wrestling championship thing that he was pushing. I don't think she liked that angle. But this is speculation because she never told me why she didn't like it. I just remember being at her house because my mom was also a single mom for quite a few years when I was growing up. And so I spent a lot of time having sleepovers at Teenie's, and I spent one summer, hanging out at the wrestling office because I was a pretty easy kid to look after. I was good at staying out of the way. But I just, I remember those words specifically, her talking about that mess with Andy Kaufman.
And he didn't do any of her towns. Is that what you're saying?
No, he didn't.
Okay.
He never went to Illinois. Every time he came to town, it was in Memphis.
Right. I remember, Andy was very different, and just he could easily piss you off. Let me just say that as a mark, I was a mark during the whole time during that. I tell a story where I went to, first matches I went to, I pretty much knew that it wasn't on the up and up, but I didn't really care. I was a huge fan. And just, you want to turn the TV off. He was just so good. I went back and watched it years later and just excellent at what he did.
He was a natural heel. I love the story that Lawler has told on his podcast when he goes through all that, when he talks about when Andy actually sort of fooled or sort of pulled in both he and my Uncle Jerry after he had one of his tantrums, so the first tantrum when Lawler pushed him in the ring and he started screaming, I'm from Hollywood, I'm going to sue you, all this stuff. And Lawler talked about going backstage and talking to Jerry Jarrett saying, I think we're going to get sued. And Kaufman comes back and gets this big smile on his face and says, well, how was that? And they both just popped big. They said, well, that was fantastic because he fooled them both.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of a kind there, Andy Kaufman was. I think I want some facts that I read that I was laughing. Don Fargo, the Fargos came from New York, and you just reminded me, they were actually doing pretty much that gimmick that they brought Famous back to Memphis. And Don didn't like it, and I've got a lot of friends in Dyersburg, Tennessee, so this is the reason I'm saying this. He didn't like Dyersburg. He thought that there was just a bunch of country bumpkins, and he didn't enjoy those people, did he?
Well, no, he didn't. And that story came straight from Don. And he said, because at the time, he said that you had to take a ferry to get there. And I didn't get to Dyersburg. Yep. I didn't get there till last summer. And of course, that's not the case anymore. But he said when he had to get on that ferry, he just thought he was going back in time, and that was sort of the end of the last straw for him. He said, I got to get out of here. This place is not for me. I
rode that ferry probably about 10 times when I was a child, so I know exactly what he's talking about. A funny story on my part with Don Fargo was my mom is the one that took me to wrestling. My dad was, I guess I've told this story before, but he's a weekend alcoholic, so we did things on the weekend, and she always took me to wrestling, but Don actually hit on my mom. So he was standing at the Hill dressing room in Blythe, Arkansas, winked at her, and said, hey, what's your name? My mom was a homecoming queen, good-looking lady. So it was just hilarious. I was like, man, my mom almost become a ring rat to Don Fargo, of all people. I was like, man, could have been Jackie. What the hell here? And then I love the story of Jerry getting into business and Teeny not being happy about Jerry being. You actually mentioned his debut was, and the only mistake, it's Haytime, Missouri, and I'm from the area, so that was one of the mistakes that nothing else I really seen but I kind of smiled at that because a lot of people say that anyway. Haiti, Missouri is what they call it everywhere. But he made his debut there. And to be honest, Jerry Jarrett was over. I'm not going to get that wrong because a lot of people, what I'm fixing to say is going to go, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But Jerry wasn't a great worker. He was not a good wrestler, but he was over like, a bologna in Ethiopia. I mean, this guy, the girls loved him. He was really, really good when it come to getting over.
You say that because you're the second person to say that in the past month. There was somebody else that I saw online talking about the fact that Jerry wasn't very good in the ring. And, the only match of his that I have watched recently, and recently I'm saying in the past 35 years, was the scaffold match that he did in Louisville, which I thought was a fantastic match. And it was a really tough one to do. That was the first scaffold match. Tough one to do because all you can really do is stand there and punch each other. And I thought that was a really good match. And I thought that he and was it Don or Al Green? I'm forgetting now which one.
I think it is Don, but I'm sorry. I can't remember either. But those that tape was actually I don't know the story of those matches. Jim Cornette actually found those on and transferred them to I guess it was in the 90s, transferred them to video because they was on regular film.
Gave me my copy. Yeah, I've got the VHS that Jim gave me when I went to see him to talk about this book.
And there was like a section of those matches. He spent all this money to get them done, and he was selling them on the and I got a copy of them from a friend of mine, and I started selling them. So I got a nice little letter from Jim, or a friend told me about something, and then Jim sent me a video and said, hey, dude, why are you selling these? So he sent it through another friend of mine where they was kidding around, but you could tell. So I just dropped them from my list. I said, he spent a bunch of money. You tell this story and I've never heard the story. It's let me make sure I pronouncing this guy's name right. Galento, is that his name? It was actually a shoot that was on live TV.
That's right, Mario Galento, and he was also known as Butch Boyette. I think Butch Boyette was his. I think that was the ring name, and Mario was his real name, but I could have that backwards. But yeah, this was a match that ended up going out live on Memphis television, where Galento basically came in and tried to attack Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler were in a match against one another, and it turned into a situation where Lawler and Jerry were together, sort of fighting for real against Galento. And that was a story that Jerry told me that sort of just predates the split with Nick Goulas, and was in his mind nothing he was ever able to prove, but something that was orchestrated by Roy Welch as a way to try to embarrass Jerry and hurt his credibility with the boys as he was gaining all this power because he'd been booking Memphis and doing so much better on the West End than what was happening on the East End of the territory with that Roy and Nick Goulas were running.
And we know
so
Nick Goulas was running the show and putting his son over every night, and no one wanted to work his son. He was horrible, and pretty much killed the business.
Horrible.
Yes,
it was terrible.
Yeah. Well, no, here's the thing. He could have been the guy had no charisma. Here's the difference. And Jerry, number one, was a better worker, but he had so much charisma and got over. George didn't even get over. I mean, no one cared to watch him. No one was paying to see, and his dad couldn't see it, which was the end of that part of the territory.
Well, yeah, and it's really sad because, what basically happened was that Nick wanted his son to be successful so much that he ended up ruining his business trying to make it happen. And so it's a sad story because Nick loved George and he really wanted the best for him, but you just didn't have a lot to work with George. He wasn't. The girls didn't like him. He was this tall, lanky guy that he was a good basketball player, and if he'd focused his attention there, he may have had some more success. But he wanted to be a wrestler because his dad was in the wrestling business, and he wanted to impress his father. So it was just sort of this reinforcing cycle where that just was never going to work. Because, like you said, George, he just had no talent in the ring, and
Yeah, I mean, you're right. George was just horrible. You look up George Goulas on YouTube. I don't know if there's anything there, but that would be someone to look for. I'm going to finish it up. We don't got a lot but I want to talk about one little thing that you said, and then I want you to put everything over how to get the book and so forth and so on. Now after she got out of the business, she was still watching. She was watching wrestling, the WWE product, and I believe you said WCW because she had so many people that were that she knew was working for both of the promotions. And I thought something funny that you said, which is it's just her personality that you bring out in the book, and also it just says everything about her. She was watching it, and she was not a fan of Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Not at all. I mean, she thought that wrestling should be a family affair, right?
Yes,
she thought that, you had to keep it clean. That's why you stayed away from the arena rats. That's why you didn't use foul language. She believed that if you kept it a family-friendly business, then she could sell tickets to the whole family rather than just mom or dad or both of them. She'd bring more people in. But when she first heard Stone Cold Steve Austin curse in a promo on TV, Stone Cold just kicked your ass, or whatever it was his tagline was, she just about lost it. I mean, she didn't like Vince McMahon, but the closest she would ever come to using a curse word was when she would say, she always referred to him as that so-and-so Vince McMahon. Because, he broke all the rules. He destroyed her business. And so she didn't like him, and she didn't like what they were doing, but like you said, she wanted the people that had left to be successful. She wanted her grandson, Jeff, to be successful. She wanted everybody who had come through the territory to have success. And though, WCW and WWF, now WWE, that was their only avenue to success at the time. And so she didn't begrudge them their success. She just hated the guy who took her business away in order to make them successful.
Yeah, and she felt that the big thing was that Vince had told the world that it was a fix, and right. I thought this was real interesting in the sense that she felt because he said it was a fix that she wasn't able to do those programs that would last. And I had a conversation with Eddie Marlin one time, and he was talking about him and Tommy was tagging in a feud that lasted anywhere from 6 months to every time they came to Jonesboro, it was that same match on top. Just with a different finish, and they were every time they came, they would sell out or they would sell big tickets, and then when they didn't, they knew it's time to back off that program. But it was one of those things. Yeah, it was one of those things that would last. He said, sometimes 8 or 9 months he could do the same main event. It's just something like that now, but it's the truth, that people felt that Vince, my deal with Vince was that he was stealing all the talent. But it was different perspective there. She felt, her being in the business, she felt like he just screwed the whole business when he did interview and say, it was it wasn't an up and up. She couldn't promote matches like that.
That's right. And just to be clear, she never did any booking, right? Jerry always did her booking, or sometimes it was Bill Dundee or sometimes Lawler. They would just kind of rotate. She was only on the promotion side, but she understood that the ability to run those programs for a long time was really important. And she believed that, and that's why she never would tolerate the boys breaking kayfabe, because she felt that if the fans ever found out that things were not exactly as they were presented in the ring, that they would revolt and never come back.
Right.
And so, that's not exactly how it has turned out, although if you do the math, there's a lot less people watching wrestling now than there were back in the day. She, between smartening up the whole world and then allowing things to, in her mind, degrade the way they did with the Attitude Era, and all that Vince pushed, she just thought that was wrong and not the right way to do things, and was a recipe for disaster.
All right, Brennon, we're out of time, but I want you to put everything over. Number one, I want everybody, he's going to be at All In. Stop by, grab a book. That's the way to get it. Shake his hand. Great book. If you're a reader and you just want to read wrestling, it gives you all the wrestling stuff you need, but just a great book. One of these days, I hope we're talking about the movie coming up. I really do. I could see a movie of this in my mind. And like I said, it took me I stayed up about 2.5 hours reading this and couldn't put it down after I got started. So go ahead and tell everyone the info, how to follow you on Twitter, everything. Give it all to us.
Absolutely. So like you said, I'll be at StarCast this starting Thursday night through Sunday. So I'd love for you to come by and say hello. If you can't make that event, you can pick up the book on Amazon in either paperback or Kindle format. And if you don't like to read, but you like listening to podcasts like this one, then it's available as an audiobook on either Amazon, directly from Audible, or on iTunes. So you take your pick. You can get whatever format suits you best. The best way to find me on Twitter is at teenyjarrett.com. The name of the book, I guess we should say that, is Teeny, that's T-E-E-N-Y, Professional Wrestling's Grand Dame. And that's a phrase that I always heard Teeny used growing up. She would talk about she would say a grand dame. She would sort of try to put a French spin on it. And it was just something that I knew that she liked, and I decided I would call her Wrestling's Grand Dame. And so anyway, you can find me on Facebook under that particular name, the full title of the book. And every week I like putting out old photos from Teeny's collection. So there's all kinds of stuff, some of which you may have seen before, because there's every once in a while I put out, sort of promo picture, but there's an awful lot that I put out that I guarantee you've never seen before.
There was a photo the other day that Mike Lano actually, I guess last week sometime, you put up for Mike with him, her, and Jeff. I was there that night. So that was just so weird. I seen that photograph, and you said it came from Mike, and I was like, I was with Mike that night. So that was really strange seeing that. Also, just something that I just want to know: Are you invited to the Christmas dinners? Are you still part of the family, or what was? Did you get any backlash for this book?
Well, I wouldn't say I've gotten any backlash, but families are tough, and I talk about some of the challenges that our family has had over the years. But I've not heard anything from my Uncle Jerry since writing this book, and he it's not like we were in touch before that.
Right.
So there hasn't been a big change in that situation, but no, Jerry and I have not spoken. And my cousin Jeff and I, although we don't, there's no animosity between us. We're also not very close. I hope to see Jeff this weekend. Last time I got to see him was down at when what am I trying to say? When WrestleCon, that's part of the WWE event down in Orlando that was held there 2 years ago. I got to see him there. And I'm hoping to see him this weekend, but no, there remain a variety of tensions in our family that keep us from celebrating the holidays together.
All right, it's just one of those things that I wondered. All right, man, we're going to get off here. Hey, thanks for joining us, Brennon. Like everyone knows, we'll be here, same bat time, same bat channel, on the best little wrestling podcast in the business. Be there. And all you know, I love my mama. Thank you, Brennon.
Thank you.
Hey, man, that went well. I forgot to tell you I have a stupid catchphrase at the end. So.
Hey, that was another great episode of Shooting the Shiznit. I do appreciate you guys joining us. We're always looking for contestants for Who Wants to Be the Best Shiznit Ever. We have shirts. That's right. We have merch.com. And shirts start at $12.99 and sizes all the way up to 6XL. A big thank you to Cloud9 LLC Vapor Club. That's our sponsor for this month. It is the go-to vapor shop in Oxford, Mississippi. Remember, Patreon side. It's our Patreon side. We're trying to get 10 Patreons. That's patreon.com, Shooting the Shiznit without a G. That's right. Bob McGee at Pro Wrestling's Between the Sheets. That's www.pwbts.com. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Gene Jackson at localstolegends.com. Sean Garmer at Wrestling to Max website. That's w2mnet.com. And our buddies over there at WrestlingNewsCenter.com. All you guys posted, we do appreciate it. You can reach me at Comic Book Mark BT, at Shooting the Shiznit on Instagram. That Comic Book Mark BT is on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. We also have a Cool Kids Wrestling and MMA Talk Facebook group. You have to ask to join. We don't like you, we kick you out. All the archives are at www.stspod.club. We're on iTunes. We're on Stitcher, Player FM, Podcast Addict, Spreaker, and all the other fine podcast players. A big shout out to Creative Control. These are our podcast brothers. Yeah, that's right. Creative Control over there. JoJo Feeney, also the Creative Control Network. Keeping it 100 with Conan. We do appreciate all the plugs and the helps there. P3 Radio with my buddy Max. Listen to the Red So Fine episode. That's one of my favorite. And two non-wrestling podcasts that I just love to listen to. It's Who's Right Podcast and Po Boys Podcast. The last couple episodes on Po Boys have been really great episodes. Y'all guys reach out. Try to listen to our podcast brethren. All right? Brethren, whatever you want to call it. If you're still listening, to all the way to the end, thank you. Thank you very much. Now let's get on with the day.